Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque. We are looking for high-quality guest suggestions for our Enterprise Security Weekly podcast to fill our upcoming recording schedule. We're committed to educating and providing entertainment for the InfoSec community, and we would love to hear from you about who you would like us to interview on the show. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and submitting the form. We will review all of your suggestions quickly, and we'll get them scheduled if they get approved. Also, join us at InfoSec World 2020, June 22nd to 24th, now at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the register button to register with our discount code, or you can also click on the schedule button to sponsor a micro interview. Jason, we missed you last week, so I had to bring some of these articles back in because you're in the middle of a lot of activities right now, and I thought kind of your thoughts and guidance on some of these were just going to be, very important because you're living the dream, baby.
No, I appreciate it. Life is crazy these days, so we're adapting and overcoming and doing the best we can. Definitely sorry I couldn't be there last week, but I'm looking forward to today. Absolutely. It's great to be back.
Yes. Good to have you back. So let's start with my first article, which is stepping into a leadership role, be ready to tell your story. Now, Paul, this article was interesting to me. We had a couple interesting calls last week, and I was thinking about, as we introduce ourselves, how do you give that background of who you are, kind of with all the history that we have, right? And I started reading this article,
I was thinking
and
the
I'm
same
like,
thing, because there were two very different calls where we had to do the exact same thing that this article is talking about for different audiences. And afterwards, I was like, I should really, did I do that right? Did I accurately describe my experience as it pertains to the audience? Which is what we do in presentations as well, sometimes even more directed, right? I think in both those calls, we were talking about a variety of topics. So how do you distill down your background as an expert to talk about those variety of topics, right?
Yeah, because we get in a tendency to point number two. I'll go back to point number one, is that we have this tendency to share our resume instead of telling them the story. It's interesting when you're put in that position to introduce yourself and give your background. The next thing you know, you start You start at the beginning of your of your work history, and you start coming forward, and by the end, you're like, I think that was probably pretty boring for them.
Yeah,
how should I have done that different?
You got to cherry pick those certain stories that have to transition. I almost want, now that I think about it even more, I almost want to have different storyboards, right? That you can kind of pull from Lego pieces, right? What do I want to let my audience know, and which of those pieces pertains most to the presentation I'm giving or the meeting that I'm in?
Right. And this article is really focused on leadership and how do you have that initial conversation as you step in as a new leader into an organization, and what are some of the do's and don'ts to make that connection with your employee base, right? And that's where the article came from, but I'm like, I can apply this elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I kind of just went through this, right? I mean, when I made that leap into the CIO role, this is exactly what happened. So for me, I took this article and I bumped it up against what I did, right? And one of the pieces was, every leader wants to have that when you're in the new role, going into that 30, 60, 90-day plan and building that out. And I took a look at it and I said, I kind of did the opposite. And basically for me, when I was speaking to my leader, the CEO of the company, I said, listen, I need a 90-day discovery. I need to meet the team. I need to know the programs. I need to learn the business units. I need to learn the individuals. And then after that, then I'll come up with my 90-day plan, right? But first, it's a discovery for me. I have to go out there and I have to build relationships with people, and I have to learn how this new organization to me operates within the confines of our company.
And it's a discovery for the rest of the team as well about
Yes.
you and what do you want them to know at what stage, right?
100%. Absolutely. It's a discovery for them to learn more about me and learn more about my leadership skills and my the way I manage an organization and things that I've had in my head from a strategic perspective, and allow them to challenge it, allow them to agree with it, allow them to help in that planning process, right? So yeah, I mean, my first 90 days was building out those relationships, learning what that business unit does, and then making strategic decisions from there, because I'd be doing no justice to the organization if I went in blind and just made decisions blind.
Yeah, and the open-ended questions, the open-ended questions that sometimes I struggle with if it's too open-ended. Tell me about yourself or tell me a funny story. I'm like, I don't know. I've been doing this a long time. Like, there's been a lot of hilarious moments, a certain percentage of which I don't think I want to share in this setting, maybe, right? Like, if it starts with that one time at ShmooCon, probably not like the best first impression, maybe, with a new client, let's say, right?
Yeah, that's true. And this is why I'm just curious, as you're doing your 90-day discovery, how are you, because they're curious, right? The employees are going to be curious about who you are. How do you tell that story in a way that connects to them personally without, reading your whole resume and this whole big background?
Or feel like you're talking about yourself too much, right? You don't want to seem like you're talking about yourself too much. Right?
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, right? I made it a point to meet with every single one of the folks on my team, right? I didn't meet with just the managers. I didn't meet with just the leaders. I met with everybody. And honestly, it was conversational, and I would send out a small agenda on just the topics I wanted to talk about. And my opening statement was, I realize this has changed, and I want to make sure you realize I have an open door policy if you ever have any questions or concerns about this change. So for me, it was like opening up that door of saying, listen, I'm here for you. I'm here for you to have conversations. I'm here for you to knock on my door if you're feeling worried about something. For me, transparency was huge, right? Because having a new leader come into an organization can be a little bit stressful, right? I mean, the article goes into the two different, I guess, mindsets of when a new leader comes in. It talks about the warriors and the warriors. I can see that, right? I mean, I didn't necessarily call them the warriors and the warriors, but for my team, it was the folks who would come in and they know their stuff and they have that technical aptitude to be challenging, right? To really want to have you prove yourself. I'll put it that way. And then the other folks, who still had great technical aptitude, very, very strong in their jobs, they took the other facet and they wanted to make sure that they were secure in their job, right? So there are two different sides of that I can totally see. The people who need to validate that you deserve to be in this role, and the other folks who need validation that you're not going to affect their livelihood and their job and their career and what they're used to. And then the article was dead on about that. I did see that.
Very good. Yeah, well, this second article is also a very interesting learning one for us as I think about where we are today, right? Leaders, do you have a clear vision for the post-crisis future? Because we've seen a lot of things unfold over the past, we were counting today, it's been 5 weeks. We're starting week 6 for us, at least. And I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, what have we seen transpire over these last 5 weeks? And how will we shift or not shift our business after this? And I want to explain a little bit because we've seen some very interesting trends start to emerge. We've always been able to work remotely. We're a remote podcast. We bring our guests in virtually all the time via Skype or Zoom. Our biggest impact is, the local employees need working from home, maybe not having that synergy. But what I notice from our partners and our sponsor side is everybody's taken a slightly different approach. of how they are engaging with something like us that can continue to do business, right? So the first one is we see sponsors that realize they have to continue to sell through the crisis, and they are shifting dollars from on-site conferences to virtual means like podcasts, and we've seen them just continue to create activities with us. Then on the complete opposite side, we see people that have gone in complete lockdown mode, right? They're not spending any money at all, and everywhere kind of in between. And so if I think through this, we see a lot of people doing webcasts. We see a lot of people starting to do virtual conferences. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, how would we shift some of the capabilities that we've have? I've met with a number of CEOs and CMOs over the past few weeks, just trying to learn from them. What do you want to see in a virtual type event or a conference or capabilities during this crisis? And I've gotten some very interesting feedback from them, which is great. How will that shift our business, right, for the future? Because I think every leader has to prepare for things being different when we get out of, the scenario.
But also, I think a great leader can definitively state when it's a time to act and when there's a time not to act. And I think there has been cases, and certainly still are true this very day, where we don't have enough information to make a decision yet. So the decision could be, let's take no action. And a great leader is going to know the difference between those times when it's time to just wait, see how things pan out in this area. But, maybe to Matt's point, in this area, when we're talking about doing things virtually, what actions do we want to take? And maybe we need some short-term actions to be taken. But when it comes to things like planning for conferences, my kind of thing is we just got to wait and see in certain instances, because we don't have enough data, and we won't for a while. So let's focus on some other things.
Yeah, I think part of that, Paul, too, is making sure that you're staying in the strategic mindset, though, right? Because where a lot of organizations went into crisis mode, right? And if you're a leader, you have to be able to juggle the tactical, the strategic, and building the vision still. Even if at the end of the day, the decision is to make no decision, right, and to stay status quo, you're making an intelligent decision because you're pulling your head out of the weeds in crisis mode, in this wartime footing, and still having strategic visibility to make that decision, even though it's a decision not to change.
Right.
Yeah, like for us, I mean, Paul and I have had this conversation. We're like, should we do a virtual conference? And I'm like, there's a lot of work in putting one of those things on. I'm not sure we're prepared, especially in the environment we're in, to be successful doing that. Yeah. Now, it may be something we look at in the future, because I think we have an interesting set of capabilities to be able to do that. But to do it in a short-term time frame like the one we're in, I don't think we could be successful pulling it off. Now, maybe later we can learn from aspects of this and be able to do something like that. But for now, it's like, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, which is recording all of our shows, getting the news and these interviews to our audience, and hope they can continue to consume them during this lockdown period.
And I also, it's the CTO role, right? I'm looking at the technology, and even though I'm very forward thinking with technology, when it comes to virtual conferences, I'm kind of the opinion right now, I want to see how the technology pans out. Dave Kennedy made a Facebook post that he did a virtual presentation, and they had avatars for the speaker in the audience. And when everyone clapped, there was little clap icons that went up. I'm like, that's really cool. I want to see how that's going to evolve, right? And choose a better and best of breed technologies, and maybe not something that is more like a webcast, right? Which is very, very different from trying to emulate an in-person conference.
Yeah, that whole augmented or virtual reality conference was very interesting to me. I definitely want to look more into that. And I mean, all of the feedback that I heard was positive, so that's a good thing, right? But is that what the future of a remote conference looks like? I don't know.
It's it'll be like Ready Player One.
Maybe
that would be cool, but
leaders don't have a clue how to manage employee data to lower risk. In this time, also, I've seen a lot of privacy articles, a lot of things around data. This was interesting. This was a Forrester study that says data surge is one of those big shifts we're seeing. Obviously, there's some other ones through the pandemic we're going to get to see, but beyond data security and protection standards, we're going to see a lot of privacy regulation, I think, continue to evolve. This is going to put pressure on leaders and organizations on how do they manage not only employee data, but it's going to be customer data. And I think there's a lot of data discussions in the near future that are going to be very interesting, and how people are going to collect, protect, disseminate, share, not share, etc.
I mean, this is a case where you need tools, right? And I think that we've reached the breaking point where even smaller organizations could be managing a lot of data, right? And now your workforce is all over the place, as well as technology. I mean, it's just like a perfect storm, as we've seen many data breaches, right? And so the ability to control your data, know where it is, and control it, I would look to vendor solutions, right? I'm not sure what exists more for the smaller businesses. There's a lot of options for, data encryption and things like that in the smaller end. On the enterprise side, you've got a lot of, you've got Varonis, right? Publicly traded 100%. Company. Spirion, who is a sponsor now of Paul Security Weekly, doing Gabe and I spent some time, and they're doing awesome things as well. StealthBits is a company that we worked with in the past as well, doing awesome things on that front. So you really need to, if you don't have one of these solutions, look into an implementation. Jason, is that what you're seeing on the enterprise side?
100%, 100%. I mean, the other side of the aisle too is the insider threat, right? I mean, we're looking at organizations right now slimming down because they have to, right? The economy is crunching. We're looking at a potential recession coming up. We're seeing furloughs and layoffs. So what happens when somebody decides to pull some of that data back because, like the article said, they have this personal attachment to it. They feel like it's personally theirs, they own it, but it's really the company's data, and they leave with it because they've been furloughed or they've been let off or whatever the case may be. So that's huge. But yeah, I mean, investments in some of the higher end data management, enterprise level oversight tools like a Varonis. I mean, even what's innately within Office 365, right? I mean, if you bump to an E5 license, you get a lot of the benefits of the security and compliance suite, where you can get some of that decent DLP type activity and oversight there, right? So there's a lot of good stuff in some of the tools you may already have. You just may have to bump your licensing up a little bit. That's all.
Well, and that's I think Microsoft could be, and Matt and I were talking about this last week, they could be such a strong player in security and compliance. The problem is the level of knowledge that you need to navigate those waters. I mean, you mentioned Microsoft and licensing in the same sentence, right? That is not an easy matrix to navigate by any stretch. I mean, and that's probably why many of your customers turn to you in your organization, right? Is help with that and there's so many new things. That's a key
piece, right? That's a key piece. Is having a partner who you can trust to guide you through those waters, get you familiarized with the different licensing models and the benefit you get by bumping up maybe a level or two, and really it's an exercise in appetite for your organization, right? I mean, if you sit back and you say, you know what, I don't need all of the bells and whistles of an E5 license within Office 365, so be it. But we're here to help our customers know what that means so they can make an intelligent decision.
Yep. Talking about third parties, supply chain transparency, technology partnership and progress. I mean, the supply chain is going through some major rifts as well, as you can imagine. And organizations that rely heavily on their third parties in the supply chain some are probably struggling pretty heavily. And I want to get some of your feedback on this, Jason. But having run a third-party vendor management program and looking at critical vendors and where they sit in the supply chain, I know how tedious it can be for a lot of organizations to manage the process. And then you go into a 5 to 6 week plus shutdown and start to think about, when you come back out, where do I focus getting that supply chain back ramped up in order to move my business forward when I'm ready to open the doors again?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it's extremely manual, right? I mean, managing third-party vendor risk is just innately a manual process. And I every opportunity I get, I try to get some level of automation there, right? So we're not We're not needing all of these bodies in manual labor to get that done. I mean, anything we can do to streamline that is obviously a benefit, right? We use GRC tools. We have the ability for our vendors to collaborate with us with those tools. But automation and orchestration is always going to be that North Star that we want to get to. This article was very interesting to me because I mean, we perform these duties from a technical perspective, right? We have a lot of technology based partners that we work with, but digging into some of the supply chain, in some ways, I'm thankful that we're in the technology space and we can have these levels of relationships with the technology companies because there is a lot of automation already. But when you dig deep into this, I mean, think about some organizations that have partners that are in farming and agriculture and how hard it must be to collect that data and really collect the information you need. I mean, they were talking about having the sustainable partnerships when it comes to agriculture and making sure everything's on the up and up there. That must be a bear. To try to manage that.
Yeah, think about our pharmaceuticals and our drug industry right now.
Yeah, and this is very industry and vertical specific, right? And of course, selfishly, I think of it in terms of technology and software companies and looking at your supply chain, but then doing a threat model on it and making those hard decisions that we are faced with every single week. How much are we going to rely on ourselves to be part of the supply chain and self-produce, and how much are we going to rely on third parties, right? And then do the threat model of like what happens if, in our case, it's a lot of SaaS providers, right? Now we try and limit the number of SaaS providers. As I was talking before the show, we have our own custom software, right? But that's a decision. What pieces go in the custom software that we're responsible for 100%. We control the supply chain mostly. When you host it on Amazon, some of that goes away. But choosing your partners carefully and choosing what you do in-house is an ongoing decision for everyone, in technology today. Like what happens if HubSpot were to make a change or go away? And I think it's experience that really dictates that. Because I think if you haven't had the experience, especially on the technology and software side, you make sometimes a false assumption that something will always be there and behave the same at the same cost. And those of us that have been around managing that stuff know that at any given time, an API could change, a software product or packaging could change, software vendor could get acquired or just go away. And what's your backup plan for that? And how critical is it to your business?
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think it's important that those decisions aren't made in a silo, right? Because again, every organization has different levels of risk appetite. You know what I mean? And we're constantly in that scenario where we look at different services or products or whatever, and we try to make a decision on build versus buy, right? Yes. Do we buy into it or do we build it from scratch? And then, we have a team of folks who get together, executive leadership, and we go through that business risk analysis, right? We take a look at it and say, here's everything it's going to take to build it. Here are all the risks that we can identify as a diverse team within this organization, finance people, services people, IT people, right? And we're making an intelligent decision around whether we should buy it or build it and own all that business risk ourselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trade-offs, right? And control, versus cost. I know when we speak to a lot of large insurance companies, many of the IT and security teams in large companies like that go, oh yeah, we have our own team of data scientists and we're doing our own data lake and analysis. And I'm like, that's great, but that's not for every organization that has those resources. Right. So you have to look at what resources you have and do the best that you can with them. We were talking about that on some other show, right? I think for insurance companies that makes great sense, right? But maybe not so much in other industries. But then looking at what are you really good at, right? And how do you bring some of that stuff, keep that stuff in house and outsource what maybe you don't have the talent and skills and knowledge in.
Yeah. True. Then we take into account this next article, the 3 recession scenarios and their potential impact on tech spending. I thought this was interesting because scenario A is what I think is the most probable, but not according to this article. So I want to walk through these 3 scenarios because I think they're pretty interesting. Scenario A is a 30% probability best case, pandemic peaks this quarter, having largest economic impact in Q2 and Q3, but rebounding in Q4. That's the boat I'm in. I think we're 5-6 weeks into an 8-week cycle, and I think we get out of that 8-week cycle mid-May. And I think most of the impact happens here and hopefully is contained in Q2 and Q3. And if that happens, that means tech spending will fall about 5% in 2020. But they're only predicting that at 30%.
Right.
The next scenario is 60% probability that it will last through 2020 with recovery in mid-2021. That means a 9% hit this year and an additional 5% hit in tech spending in 2021. And then the last scenario, 10% probability, is this pandemic recurs and the economic downturn extends into 2021. That has some really deep cuts in spending in it. Jason, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I my heart of hearts like scenario A. I almost feel like it's going to be somewhere in the middle of scenario A and scenario B. And the only reason why I say that,
I agree.
I say that because every state is going to reboot their economy in a different fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my fear, right? And you're going to have a state like Rhode Island that we're in reboot their economy slower than maybe someone who's willing to take a little bit more risk in rebooting their economy and getting things going, right? So I think that's going to have an effect. I think it's going to be somewhere in between scenario A and scenario B because of that.
Yeah,
it's not
and there's no way to
stroke
predict
of a
that.
pen decision from the federal government that's going to open up the economy. You have 50 individual states who have a say in that.
Yeah, and there's no way to predict that either, and what direction that's going to go in. What if a percentage opens up too soon and then has to back off and kind of restart? And what if they could have opened up sooner but they don't, and everywhere in between, right? I mean, there's so many variables to play with. I think you got to focus on what you can predict and how to keep your business and sustained regardless of those scenarios, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, there are going to be adverse effects of this that are going to roll into 2021. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's organizations who had to push projects off and not do those project implementations because of dollars or time or being in a lockdown scenario, whatever the case may be, that's all going to get pushed out to somewhere probably around the end of this year, Q4, or into 2021. We're going to see a rolling effect of this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, just my organization ourselves have seen so many projects put on delay, stalled, pushed out until further notice, put on pause, or just 100% closed, and we'll get back to you later when things are normal.
See, what I think is interesting, though, is I think when things start to open up, I don't think it's going to have as big of an impact because, especially in technology projects, right? So think about a wireless rollout, right? Mm-hmm. What better time to do it when you can have a few more people working in the office and there's some testing to see if you have immunity? You can assemble a team and go, hey, we can go and do this like all right now because everyone else is working remotely, right? So I think there's going to be some that are going to benefit from this environment.
Honestly, Paul, that's been a saving grace for many of our projects.
Yep.
We've had opportunities that we've worked with the leadership in our clients' IT organization, and we're basically looking at each other saying, "There's never going to be a better time to do this.
Than now.
Let's do it now."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, those conversations are happening. And in many instances, that's saving grace for a lot of IT services companies is that you're in this crazy window where nobody's in buildings.
It's awesome.
Right. And you can actually implement and do cutovers without affecting the business.
Yeah. I even think transition to cloud, too. I think it's pushing. I think it is pushing certain projects in technology that would have been pushed off. So
here's the one thing that I may be forecasting a little bit. Is you're going to start seeing organizations say, holy crap, we had 95% of our workforce working remotely successfully for the last 3 or 4 months. We may want to start rethinking our brick and mortar in our buildings. I mean, that's something I see actually taking a foothold, right? In CEOs and boards of directors looking at saying, why do we have so much real estate?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the real estate market. I agree.
Yeah, we talked about this last week. That's why I was hoping you were here, Jason, because we saw this survey from CFOs. 3 and 4 said they're going to have at least 5%. I think that's actually low. I think we could see much higher remote work workforces after this, because people are working remotely. Why have all this real estate if I don't need it, and I can prove that I can support a remote workforce?
Well,
I mean, we're going through the proof of concept right now for leaders to be able to look at it and say, I have confidence that we're going to be productive in a fully remote workforce.
But I can also see the scenario happening where teams really just need to be in the same room and whiteboard. Like, and there are certain times, even in our small team, where I'm like, I really just wish we could all get in the same room and whiteboard. When that's possible, we're going to do that. Now, larger organizations, what I could potentially see happening is, you downsize or you're renting out portions of your buildings to other companies that
shared
space, right? Their employees are going in. It's not not your building, right? But you need to get together once a week for an afternoon, and this space is kind of circled through. Now, what's interesting is what type of security do we apply to this scenario? Because that is like a WeWork on steroids.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's, I have to book conference rooms now. So, now I sit back and I say to myself, I could have this meeting remotely with my entire workforce, that needs to be on this meeting. I don't need to be in a physical spot but for those meetings where you do want to whiteboard and you do want to have folks sitting around a table and brainstorming, I book a meeting room, right? And maybe in a shared space.
Yep.
Right.
I can see that happening.
But no, you're right. We're gonna have to think about the security around shared spaces, right?
Yes.
In communal conference rooms and those type of things. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Bring your own collaboration platform is what it's going to be.
Funny. I mean, Sam wants to get back in studio so she can go sit in Paul's office and not leave until he finishes his tasks.
That's true. That's the thing.
It's a whole different scenario. My last article ties into the previous one we talked about in the tech spend. Obviously IT services are getting hit the most. You even said it, right? Projects are being pushed off. This article says 90 to 120 days, which means end of Q3, end of Q4, which, to your point, Jason, definitely has an impact into 2021 spend.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Even to the point where we will reboot this project at a future date unknown. I mean, that's a conversation too, right? Because many organizations are looking at their cash flow and saying, oh boy, we're getting affected by this. Any project that's not considered immediate need or necessity, we're going to take a time out on until we know what our cash flow looks like and we know what our financial footing is going to look like.
Yeah, I definitely see that in our sales cycle too. I mean, definitely see the smaller companies really conserving cash, kind of just waiting to see what happens before they're going to start to ramp spending back up in any capacity.
Exactly. And that's what's, hurting the IT professional services industry the most is the fact that so many people are being uber conservative right now because they don't know what the future brings. They don't know what their cash flow is going to look like, so they're not going to expend on anything that's not essential.
Yeah. Yep. Jason, thank you for coming back and joining us for this great conversation. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.